Hi, Susanna. How are you doing?
Hi, Manvir.
How are you?
Very good, thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, good to see you. Thank you so much, Susanna, for your time. Welcome to Growth Mindset Conversation. It's my pleasure to have you today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
For my viewers and listeners today, Susanna Harkonen is a psychological counselor and coach who specializes in workplace mental health and wellness. She has professional training in neuroscience, neurobiology, positive psychology, and mental health first aid for organizations. Susanna has worked for the United Nations International Labour Organization, and she also has multicultural business and people management experience from various parts of the world, and including India. She focuses on making mental wellness a new normal at work. Thank you, Susanna. It's my pleasure to have you today. Thank you so much for being there today.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here.
So, Susanna, to start with, as you know, the show's name is Growth Mindset Conversation. The first question to the guest goes like, what is growth mindset for Susanna Harkonnen?
Growth mindset for me, I have been into positive psychology for a long, long time. Actually, when I
Yeah,
first discovered it, I thought that this was going to be the new revolution. And in many ways, it has. It didn't happen quite the way I thought, but it has been a big revolution. For me, growth mindset is about openness and curiosity.
mm-hmm.
So openness to yourself, towards others, curiosity about the world, about yourself.
Yeah, yeah,
And oftentimes when it comes to growth mindset, it really is about what's going on within you, increasing that self-awareness.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and perhaps also ability to, which with self-awareness comes ability to question oneself and ability to be humble, ability
Mm-hmm.
to admit to failure, um,
Mm-hmm.
and ability to also know your strengths.
Yeah. Yeah. To know yourself in a holistic way, in a wholesome
Exactly.
way. Yeah, including
Exactly.
your strengths, challenges, growth areas. That's growth mindset. Having that curiosity also.
Yes. Yeah.
So, with that curiosity and openness and self awareness in mind, Susanna, you specialize working in mental wellness at work. And one of the areas I see organizations struggling is creating psychological safety at work. So, how would you define psychological safety in very, very simpler words so that the business leaders who's watching this show can relate to it?
Well, psychological safety at the moment is quite a sexy word. A
I
lot of
know.
organizations are
Yeah.
using. It's
Yeah.
been thrown out as one of those, like mindfulness and others.
Yeah.
But actually, psychological safety as a concept from a psychological perspective has been around for a long, long time. We can
Yeah.
go back to ancient Indian scriptures, and we can go back to Greeks and Romans and all the great philosophers.
Yeah.
Psychological safety is not something new.
Yeah.
However, what I find really interesting, this is not going to be a really short explanation.
Yeah. It's okay.
What I find interesting about psychological safety with current neuroscientific research
Yeah.
is that we have been able to see that psychological safety is actually a nervous system state in people.
Okay.
So when we talk about psychological, we often think it's in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, when it comes to safety and psychological safety for individuals, it means that it's something that's in your body. It's a felt sense that your nervous system has.
Okay.
Because our bodies are wired for two things. It's very simple, actually. There's two things, two ends of the spectrum. There's the threat response
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
connection response. So
Mm-hmm.
you either have your threat alarms going on, or you feel safe. And when you feel safe, you're able to be innovative, creative, give your best, connect with people. It's even working for your digestion and all these things. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
when you're in that space, that's the good things happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And right now, the majority of people are actually more on that other end of the spectrum, on the threat
Right.
response,
Yeah.
because of stress, because of the pressures. Um, lack of family structures or changing family structures in India and everywhere else.
Yeah.
So the psychological safety around us has been erupted, and we perceive more and more threat.
Mm-hmm.
And this is important piece, which people often don't understand, is that psychological safety is not something that you can tell people like, oh, you should be psychologically safe. It doesn't happen that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because this is part of our autonomic nervous system. And that means that it's autonomic, not
Mm-hmm.
under control, and it's a survival response.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So your body, your nervous system is like seeing the psychological threat as it was a physical threat.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And therefore, the first thing is to learn for the individuals to calm themselves and have that awareness, that peace of mind, that centeredness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't want to sound philosophical or, like you should meditate yourself psychologically safe. No, meditation can be part of it, but it's not,
Yes.
cure it all.
Yeah.
But it starts with individuals. And when individuals are psychologically safe, that is leaders. When they
Mm-hmm.
are grounded, safe, humble, they are able to create that psychological safety for their teams.
Yeah. 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 Very interesting. Very interesting. A lot of insights in that reply.
Yeah.
It's a felt sense.
It's
And
a felt.
yeah. And you also said, leaders, if they're psychological safe themselves, it's easier for them to establish psychological safety. Right?
Yes.
It's felt sense for them also.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in your experience of working with organization, working with leaders, can you give me some examples where leaders were not aware of that, they are not psychological safe themselves, and then they worked on themselves?
I have oftentimes leaders have a resistance towards this, because there's this image in any culture of
Yeah.
leader who knows it all. It's particularly prevalent in places like India, for example,
Yeah.
where it's a little bit more top-down and kind of culture. So you need to be the strong, the knowledgeable, the top dog, whether it's men or women.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work that way. So leaders are sometimes resistant to admitting that there is some failures or fault lines in them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's quite fascinating, actually, when you work with leaders, the shift that can happen when they have a growth mindset. I have seen a few people absolutely blossom, starting from factory supervisor level to top management level, and then specialists and everything in between.
Yeah.
So it's that openness. I have had a few cases where people would come to me and they were sent to me and they didn't want to work with me, which are the most interesting and the most challenging ones.
Yeah.
The organization would say like, oh, we have this guy that is a real problem, and we need to fix him, and I cannot fix somebody who doesn't want to be fixed. And it's not my job to fix somebody, it's his job to fix himself. But in for example, in this particular case, it was quite interesting that the person was able to see what was happening and did a complete turnaround. To the point of his wife contacting me and thanking me for the work that we had done together. And his subordinates, actually, we did a follow-up on that one, so there was a real shift. Real shift in his behaviors towards his subordinates and towards the whole team, and the team was thriving. Their productivity levels went up. This environment where you could actually measure the productivity levels pretty easily. So that was one example. And now the important thing here is that it was him who did the job. He had the openness and the curiosity to ask himself the tough questions. He had the self-awareness to admit that maybe I have been a little bit too tough, or maybe I've been pushing people too hard, or maybe I have not built that safety there. So he was able to do it.
Yeah.
And it was actually very, very, it's those are the highlights of this kind of job.
Yeah. 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 And I'm listening to a lot of benefits that when leaders are psychological safe themselves, productivity, and they'll not be stressed. And I'm sure there are more benefits to it. But now
Mhm.
I'm curious that what are the certain behaviors or signs which tells people that, which tells organizations or HR that these leaders need something on psychological safety for themselves first than anything else?
Well, it's the classical telltale signs, high
Hmm.
turnover,
Hmm.
burnouts.
Hmm.
Teams, I mean, this has been researched quite extensively, as you also probably know,
Yeah.
and Harvard and other places, is that when you have psychologically safe teams,
Yeah.
people are more innovative, they're more creative, and we are talking about much higher percentages.
Yeah.
I think one of the research studies, people were 137% more
Hmm.
productive when they were
Yeah.
psychologically safe team.
Yeah. Yeah.
So unfortunately, at the moment, we live in an environment where the majority of companies are not psychologically safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not necessarily only the leaders' fault.
Yeah.
Leaders are under a lot of pressure. Let's
Yeah.
face it. I mean, being a business leader in these days, it's a tough job.
Yeah.
So, what is what, but at the same time, if the leader is not and the psychological safety comes from, you can learn it, you can heal it,
Mm-hmm.
but it requires digging. So it doesn't
Mm.
come with one week workshop or playing with a mindfulness app.
Yeah. Yeah.
It can
Yeah. I
it can
hear it.
but it's
Yeah.
not like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
all be psychologically safe and get a
Yes.
consultant to make us all psychologically safe.
Yeah. 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 It
And I think,
requires a deep work.
sorry,
It requires a deep work.
it requires deep work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in India, the ancient yogis and rishis, they
Hmm.
knew it was a lifelong path.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Working on yourself is a lifelong
Yes.
path.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But there's an interesting thing that I wanted to bring up about the psychological safety and the and about the neuroscience aspect of it, because
Mm-hmm.
that it's perhaps easier to grasp through neuroscience than through other means. When
Mm-hmm.
you have a physical reaction, you can actually track it.
Mm.
Is my digestion blocked? Am I getting headaches? Am I tense? Is something
Mm.
happening in my body? The more you
Mm.
learn, listen to your body, the more it tells you.
Mm. Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and in neuroscience, there is this thing called neuroception.
Yeah.
And neuroception is your ability to you read energy. So when I talked about that threat connection
Yes. Connection. Mm.
spectrum, that's the neuroception. So
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
you read the vibes around people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you ask me whether there's something in the leader's behavior that triggers psychological safety or unsafety,
Yeah.
actually it's who they are. It's the vibe.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
The teams are constantly scanning each other and the
Yes.
leader, especially the leader, because the leader is in a position of power.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's it's
Yeah.
it's uh, it's the vibe is actually not, it's actually a tangible thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And unconsciously, we are doing it, right? We are all doing it unconsciously. Yeah. And we are
Complete.
deciphering the whole lot of, I think, whole bytes of data in maybe fraction of seconds and judging people, judging that vibes and making our own stories.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
part of the growth mindset is non-judgment.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
You cannot know the other person's story, or we make stories very quickly, and we don't
Yeah.
give people room to be who they are. And
Yeah.
part of psychological safety is letting people be who they are.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
In an
And
organization, sometimes when you are a leader and you have tough um,
mhm.
objectives, for example,
Yeah.
deadlines are ticking, or clients you need to deliver, and there are all sorts of pressures. We all,
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
done that.
Yeah.
um, it is natural sometimes to get anxious and annoyed and say like, oh, that person always is a lazy
Mm-hmm.
bum, or doesn't do this, so I want him to do it that way or her to do it that the other way. And yet at the same time, if we create that space where people are not panicked,
Mm-hmm.
then they perform much better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you have those bad apples that you need to get rid of. Not everybody
Mm-hmm.
can be brought into psychological
Yeah.
safety.
Yeah.
And we are adult beings here. So leaders have their part to play and team members have their part to play.
Yeah. It's a
Not that
co-creation.
leaders can come in and provide psychological safety to people who behave like kindergarten,
Mm-hmm.
brats.
Yeah. Hmm.
So it goes both ways, and both people have the responsibility for things to work. So the
Yeah.
neuroception, when you bring that up, when you make it safer for everybody, and where people start taking responsibility for their actions and their thoughts and their behavior, that's
Hmm.
also benefits the whole and teams.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And one thing leads to another, right? So it creates a culture. Yeah. So it's a tight rope leaders walk on, right? On one side, there are targets. On one side, there are results they need to create. And on the other side, we are talking about engagement, psychological safety. And we are also talking about they being psychological safe themselves.
Yeah.
So at the same time, another paradigm we are saying is it's a deep work. It's not that one bullet shot. It's a deep, deep work, right? Having said all these things, knowing all these things, still, what are few ways that business leaders can learn from you right now here, that where they can start creating that psychological safety for their teams?
Hmm. You know, now you asked me a good question. Um, I think that it's a very holistic thing.
Mm,
We all have different wounds. We all have different backgrounds. We all have different challenges in life.
yeah, yeah.
Um, when it comes to the holistic piece here is that there's a really close connection with body and mind.
Mm,
You really need to take care of your body. Eat healthy,
mm-hmm,
exercise.
mm-hmm,
It's one
mm-hmm,
of the basic things, but
yeah.
it does have an impact on your psychological well-being.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Tremendous impact on your psychological well-being.
mm-hmm,
And then I think that what I always encourage people is to seek help, work with
mm,
somebody,
yeah, yeah,
work with a coach, work with a therapist, work with somebody who actually has those pieces and that can challenge you and that
yeah,
you trust.
yeah,
You have trust issues due to whatever reasons. If you have a hard time trusting people, if you have hard time allowing your teams, for example, to function a certain way,
yeah,
work with somebody who can coach you and guide you.
yeah,
Because psychological safety is built by connection with people.
yeah, yeah,
So the more you can start trusting, the more you can build that safety.
yeah, yeah.
And the more it's a very fruitful circle. Once when it starts
Mm,
building, it goes on and on and on, and it's actually really beautiful. So that's one of the things. Then honesty is incredibly important. Taking a good look at yourself and at your situation.
yeah. Mm,
Again, sometimes this is easier with somebody else.
mm, yeah, yeah.
And we're not asking somebody to change overnight.
No. Mm,
But when you build psychological safety for your teams, for example, the biggest it's built on honesty and courage.
mm,
It's built on leaders who can actually show up and say, look, I made a mistake, I'm so sorry. It's like a good parent saying, like, I raised my voice, I'm really sorry, this shouldn't have happened.
mm,
But it was a
mm,
parent knows that it happens.
mm,
We're not perfect, and everybody
yeah.
who's a leader knows that sometimes we just make mistakes.
Yes.
So when you have that honesty and courage, And then you really walk your talk. So there's no double standard between the official discourse and the way you act. That is actually the biggest thing in all organizations. People know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So playing the games, sometimes, you can be strategic,
Mm.
be
Mm.
smart,
Mm.
but don't have double standards.
Yeah. That's right.
Your
Yeah.
team will.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I have two beautiful examples actually from India, because I've worked
Ah. Yeah.
quite a lot with India and
Mm.
have a tremendous respect for people that I have worked with and for. Actually, the best leader I have ever worked for comes from India,
Oh.
and absolutely, absolutely
Would love to hear more.
outstanding leader
Yeah.
who was able to build psychological safety for his
Mm.
teams,
Mm-hmm.
and he was so exceptional. I have worked for him twice, and on several on two occasions, and I have observed him. I didn't have psychological safety. I had been in a situation where I had leaders who were absolutely narcissistic, and like there was a lot of going on. I had
Yeah.
I had some experiences that were quite traumatic.
Yeah.
So I didn't trust leaders. I didn't trust uh, my boss,
Mm-hmm.
and yet there was this person who was grounded, smart, but came with a heart. I knew from deep down that he had my best interest at heart.
Wow.
He had business interest at heart as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And
Yeah.
he's very good at what he's doing and tremendously successful.
Mm.
But at the same time, he also had heart, and I could
Yeah.
feel it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that one encounter that happened
Mm-hmm.
over 10 years ago when we first started working together was actually a real life-changing experience for me.
Wow.
I don't even think that he knows that, but
Let him view this episode.
but yeah, it was quite quite
Yeah.
quite tremendous.
Yeah.
And this particular company, what they did, for example, with COVID,
Mm.
they really they engaged therapists immediately. They made sure that everybody was okay. There were all these things that were put in place immediately. And the
Mm.
leader was making sure that people were okay. His team and his people were okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
This in northern Punjab.
Yeah.
And another company that I have worked for in Chennai, in a completely different field, did the absolute same thing.
Wow.
They really put in place systems. The managing director was calling people personally, making sure that they were okay. There were trainings being put in place. And the feedback that the team gave to him was that the most important thing was not the content of the training or the engagement or things like that. The most important thing was that he cared.
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's very interesting, empowering, and inspiring, actually. Beautiful. And one common thread which I observed was that caring for humanness, caring for people, and in my words, I call it human to human connection. Human leadership is the framework I use for this kind of caring. Yeah, I think
Mm.
that's what came for me. That somebody, of course, is caring for business, but it's we call people first, but many times we actually don't live that value. So these companies or these leaders were living that value where people came first than anything else, because nobody knew what COVID-19 is going to do for the organization, but everybody knew that COVID-19 is having a bad effect on definitely on human beings. So I guess, accepting that, acknowledging that, and working that was the common thread here, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
And then it was quite interesting to observe from my perspective as well, is that when you have a leader like that, then you're willing to walk through fire for them.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Absolutely, actually speaking. Yeah. And Of course, Gartner and other institutions have done a lot of research, and a lot of research has been published around that salary is the second or third priority. The first priority is the manager, the leader they are working for, and which is so true. We see that, right? Each day when we work with executives, leaders, teams, we see that.
Yes, it is
Yeah,
very true.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
But leaders are not perfect. And that's also part of the growth mindset and
yep,
psychological safety. You create psychological safety by admitting that you're not perfect.
yeah,
No
yeah,
declaration are needed, but just saying like,
yeah,
this being yourself.
yeah, yes, yeah, that's
And
right.
when it comes to openness, I think oftentimes what we tiptoe around very difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to push them aside, and it's kind of nicer to let the HR handle them or
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
handle them
yeah,
or read between the lines.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that is very counterproductive to psychological safety. So
yes.
really there are three simple rules that help. It's like you need to bring it up, and you
Mm-hmm.
need to talk it up, and you need to wrap it up.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's right. That's very helpful actually. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, as you're bringing in, and you also brought this COVID-19 situation, and we all are working in remote settings now,
Mhm.
you know, and with respect to psychological safety, whether it's trust, whether it's difficult conversation, any situation, remote settings are making things little more difficult, right? When we are not meeting people, when we are really missing on that human to human connection and that vibe. Anything else would you like to suggest to the viewers of this show, that what else they should be taking care while in this era of remote leadership, they are surviving this era of remote leadership? How do they excel in this era?
Well, it's from as a psychological counselor who works with people who are burnout, anxious, depressed, and
Mm,
not well. This is a huge problem at the moment,
yeah,
and there are quite a few taboos around the topic. My wish is that at the moment the leaders would be more and more openness towards supporting people, putting systems in place so that you can actually support people's mental health.
yeah,
Mental health is a little bit of a taboo in places, many places. It's
yeah,
huge stigma everywhere, but
yeah,
especially, it is a big stigma in India.
yeah, yeah,
And what people often forget is that mental health is not about mental illness.
yeah,
Mental illness is a tiny little fraction of all the mental health things. And what we're
yeah,
seeing with COVID-19 is that all these things are boiling to the surface: the anxiety, the all sorts of feelings. And what
yeah,
people could be helped with so little
yeah,
if leaders are willing to put systems in place and be open about it.
yeah, yeah,
The company that I mentioned in Chennai, they actually, one of the things was that what they were talking to their people and saying like, these things are
mm,
completely normal to feel this way. If you need help, here's where you can go.
yeah, yeah,
And not shaming them or not making them feel guilty or not saying like, you toughen it up or just put up with this, because people who are in that state cannot perform properly. It's
yes,
not neurologically possible.
yeah,
Their
yeah,
cognitive skills just go down. So the
yeah,
more you support them, and the more you can make them feel safe in the sense that I have your back, the
yeah,
better.
yeah,
It can happen. It can happen through getting in touch with them, calling them, doing Zooms. It does not replace the human connection,
mm-hmm. Yeah,
but it is helpful, and making sure that people are feeling
right.
cared for. It boils down to the same thing that we said earlier: heart
Yeah.
and being
Hard.
careful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And everybody is different, right? Every culture is different. You might have your own ways of bringing that heart out in that culture. and somebody else might have their own ways. I think, what I'm getting from what you said is observing, listening, being there. Being
Yeah,
there is the word, I guess. And everybody could react differently to different things. So
yeah,
just being there and accepting that that reaction is not an unfair reaction, not judging people, not calling that unfair or not expected. So
yeah.
it can be fair in my world, but cannot be fair in somebody else's world, right? So we are all different. Accepting those differences is also a big way in psychological safety.
Very, very true.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Cool. So thank you so much. I would have loved to continue the discussion, but it's time to wrap up the discussion, Susanna. Thank you so much. Some wonderful stories you shared, some wonderful messages and insights. Thank you for this awesome, awesome discussion and great insights. Appreciate your time and the value you have created for my audience today, Susanna.
Thanks so much, Manfir, for having me. This was fun.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
thank you everyone for watching this video. See you all again in the next video in this series. And do subscribe to this channel to watch more videos here to help you succeed in your own journey. Thank you and all the very best.